to welcome you to today's video conference on human rights and hate speech. In particular, I'd like to welcome our very special guest, Professor Linden, who's here with me in our London office. And I'd like to make a special welcome to all of you students who are here today. So we have, and please forgive my accent, Liceo Scientifico Fermi in Italy, Mirhorod General English School in Ukraine, Tikhon Hadash Herzliya in Israel, and MACE 2000 in Egypt. And I'm really looking forward to hearing everything that you have to say today. Now, before we begin, I'd just like to check if anyone will need any translation during today's video conference. If you would like me to pause for translation, would you wave right now? Fantastic. We'll continue then. I'm just going to run through some advice, some tips to help you to make the most of today's video conference. And firstly, I'm going to repeat something that Nonika just said because it's very important. And that's that we all speak slower and clearer than we normally would. I will try and do this, Professor Linden will try and do this, and it'd be really helpful if you all speak slower and clearer too. We all have very different accents here because we're all from very different parts of the world. And my accent may sound very strange and unfamiliar to you. So it's important that we try and speak slower to help others understand us better. If you don't understand anything, or if you don't hear anything, then it's your job to let us know. So come up to the microphone, don't be shy, and ask someone to repeat what they have just said. It's also important in today's video conference to always speak from your own personal perspective. You're here to represent you and no one else. You're not representing your school or your country or your religion or faith. You're here with your perspective and your own views. So try and use the word I when you speak rather than we. So say I think this rather than we all think this, because actually someone might not think that and they might disagree. It's okay in today's video conference to have a different perspective from someone else, and that might be from someone in your own classroom as well as someone elsewhere. So don't be worried about adding your own voice and your own opinion. It's wonderful when we hear different perspectives from the same classroom, as well as when we hear them from different classrooms. And finally, the most important skill that you'll be using in today's video conference is your ability to listen. It's really important that you listen to what other people are saying very carefully so that you can think whether you have a comment or a question based on what's just been said to you. I'm going to run through the agenda now so you know what's coming up and there's no surprises. So we're going to start with Professor Linden speaking about some of his work and his perspectives on hate speech. You'll then have the opportunity to ask him lots of questions and he'll have the opportunity to respond. There will then be a chance for you to talk about hate speech in your communities, how it affects them and what you think you can do to stand up for them. And then we'll finish with a time of reflection. So there's lots to get through in today's video conference, and I hope that we'll be able to hear from as many of you as possible. That's plenty from me now. I've been speaking for far too long, so I'm going to hand over to Professor Linden to speak about some of his experiences. Thank you.
Good morning, and a special thank you to Stefania in Fermi Bari and to Michele for your emails in response to my blog. It was very interesting and much appreciated, so thank you. Today I'm kind of looking for your help in dealing with what is a really big dilemma, a dilemma between two great human rights. And it's hard, I think, for everybody to see how we can hold the two together. And these two human rights are best expressed in the United Nations Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was produced in 1966. And in Article 19, it says, everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. Now, why is that important as a human right? I would say it's because what really characterizes us as human beings and makes us different from animals is not the only thing. Obviously, our DNA is all pretty similar and even quite similar to animals. But what really makes us human beings is our ability to communicate. And the fact that we live in a world in which being human is integrally fitted into living a world of communication. And just look at us today. Here we are, 5 countries, if you're talking about where we're sitting in this little offshore island from Europe, Anna and I, and there you all are. I suppose it'd be very interesting afterwards just to look at the map and draw a line between your different countries, your great big arc, thousands upon thousands of miles. And Anna and I were both saying that 10 years ago, it would have been inconceivable that we could be doing this. I mean, we're reaching, as human communities, new levels of communication all the time. And of course, if we don't have the right to talk to each other, if somebody can say, you're not allowed to say that, you're not allowed to talk to students in Ukraine, how can you possibly talk to young women in Egypt and say what you're saying? Then we've got a serious problem. So the right to expression is really fundamental to us being human. But the very next article in the covenant, Article 20, says this: it prohibits any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. And this is no less important in a sense, because just imagine everywhere you went, there were advertisements telling you to hate people and attack them on billboards or on the television. I mean, we couldn't have a society. Society would fall apart. So this part of the covenant, this human right, is the right to have a harmonious, happy, and productive society, because everything would fall apart with hate speech was allowed in that sort of way. Okay. Now, clearly then, the right to expression, freedom of speech, has got limits. That's recognized in the United Nations declarations, that you can't have absolute freedom of expression, absolute freedom. And just think about the different contexts as well. You could say something or express something in one context, which would be absolutely fine. But if you did it somewhere else, it would be not fine. You could say something in the classroom, which if you said it in a mosque or in a synagogue or in a church or in a temple, you couldn't do that in that particular context. It'd be the wrong place to say it. The famous example as well is what you are saying. I mean, if you said fire in a crowded theatre, that's the famous example. If you say fire in a crowded theatre, people rush out. Sometimes they can be trampled to death. I mean, this happens in clubs and things like that, where the security doors are locked. People, you say fire and there isn't a fire, you're almost complicit in resulting in the deaths of people. But also, if you start shouting in a theatre when everybody's trying to listen to the play, or shouting in a ballet and everybody's trying to listen to the ballet and watch the ballet, you're going to get thrown out as well, because there's an understanding. You're breaking the rules of how you behave in that particular context. And Anna and all the facilitators for the face-to-face program set out little rules that we all have to keep when we're in this particular context. Similarly, you all have a complete right to express yourself and to a right of free speech during this video conference. But if you all talk at once, then everybody loses that right, because nobody can communicate because there's so much noise. So the context and the way you do it have natural limits. We don't have to invent limits. They're there, as it were, perfectly natural. So what is hate speech, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about hate speech. How is it different from love speech, if you see what I mean? And if I say, I promise you that I will end after 10 minutes, and I carry on talking for 30 minutes, apart from the fact that Anna will biff me on the head, I'm breaking the promise doing that. But when I promise, the words enact, fulfill what I'm actually saying. A promise is a verbal thing that you do. If you say, I love you, it's kind of like an act of loving. It's the same way as a husband and wife will kiss each other. A kiss is a bodily expression of love. Saying I love you is a bodily expression of love, except you're using your voice in your voice box and so on to say it. It's what we call a performative utterance. It performs what the words say. Now, the question I expect you're thinking is I hate you the same sort of thing? Well, not quite. My own experience, when I was your age, I used to be quite jealous of people in my class that were good at sport or were absolutely brilliant and teacher's pet in the classroom. And, you could easily say, oh, I hate you. But you didn't mean that. You meant I'm very jealous of you. So in many cases, saying I hate you has lost any great power. Hate speech isn't just saying I hate you. Hate speech is much, much more than that. It's speech and utterances and talking in a way that makes people, provokes them into joining in hating a particular individual or a particular group of people, racial, religious, or national, and makes them then want to go on and commit violence against them or discriminate against them or be hostile towards them or to abuse their human dignity, to degrade them and make them feel worthless by the way they're treated and the way they're verbal. And you can almost talk about verbal violence when people talk in certain ways. So that's the sort of thing that hate speech is. And obviously the worst hate speech is speech that provokes people to violence. And in my own work, a lot of the work I've done has been in Africa, in Rwanda, for example, where after the Holocaust in Rwanda, we had probably the worst genocide that humanity's ever known. 800,000 people died. That was preceded by masses of hate speech. There was a radio station that everybody listened to called Radio Libre des Mille Collines, the Free Station, ironically entitled The Free Station, Radio Libre des Mille Collines, of the Thousand Hills. Rwanda is very mountainous, like many parts of the world, like Switzerland, and many hills. And Radio Libre des Mille Collines put out hate speech against the Tutsis again and again and again. And they called the Tutsi cockroaches, inyenzi. And of course, what do you do with cockroaches? Well, you stomp on them, you jump on them and try and kill them. You don't leave even one, because if you leave one cockroach, they'll soon start coming back. You eliminate the cockroaches. And that's what happened. A genocide occurred, and many, many Tutsi and some Hutu, of course, died in that terrible genocide in 1994. Hate speech generates fear. That's one of the main things it does. And it generates violent hatred that is expressed in pogroms and attacks on minority groups because they maybe have a different religion from you, they look different from you. And the history of the world has been full of those events based on hate speech being used. So the question I really want to put to you is, what do you think is the right balance between freedom of speech and the need to curtail and stop hate speech because of its consequences? How far can you go? Is hate speech just being offensive to people, being unpleasant and offensive? Should you ban that? Should governments intervene in this? Or are there other ways of dealing it? What sort of balance do you think we should set there? And then draw on your own experiences and tell us a little bit about where you've heard hate speech in your society, in your schools, and the way people talk about minorities who are racially different, nationally different, or religious. I think we'd really value your opinion on this. Over to you now.
Thank you very much, Professor Linden. Lots for everyone to think about there. And what I'd like to do actually is open this up now for some discussion on that question that Professor Linden just asked. So think about, what is this balance between freedom of expression and freedom from hate speech? How far should you go in either one of those directions? And have you got any experiences that you can draw on from hate speech in your own lives or own community? So I'm going to start with gathering some comments from each school in turn, but we'll start with the school in Egypt, Mace 2000. Then we'll go over to Liceo Scientifico Fermi in Italy, then to the school in Israel, and then to you in Ukraine. To hear some comments on this. And do remember to respond to what others have said as well. So over to you in Egypt. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anna as well. So for me, I think that balance between freedom of speech and hate speech is a very thin and difficult line, you know. Freedom of speech, I think, is a right that is given to us, but we have to use it with respect, and there is a responsibility in that right. So I think the moment you start to use freedom of speech to disrespect someone else or to treat them in a non-honorable way, that's the moment you start to cross the line, because you have a very big responsibility the moment you're giving that right to you. Thank you.
Hello, this is Noor. I agree with everything Anna said. I think the line should be drawn when you begin to offend someone, and when somebody starts. I'm a big believer in empathy, and I think if you're going to say something to someone, you should think twice about how you would feel someone saying that to you. And I think if people did that, it would be much easier to find that balance between freedom of expression and disrespect. Here in Egypt recently, there have been lots of events going on and lots of political instability. And one of those things, one of the side effects is that people are now beginning to draw lines between, you know, you're on the side of the military and you're on the side of the Muslim Brotherhood. And each side is saying things that are very disrespectful to the other side, even though it is freedom of speech to express that you disagree with someone's political opinion, but they're taking it to a line where they're offending each other personally. And I've known people who've actually, who are friends and who've actually stopped becoming friends or have lost each other because they disagreed on certain topics, like certain political topics. I think it's a prime example of how hate speech can have adverse effects, because now the country's somewhat split in half. Thank you.
Hi, my name is May, and I would like to say that freedom of speech is just trying to say what is on your mind without someone tell you to stop or that's wrong. But when someone tell you that what you're thinking is wrong and just try to make a debate with you, and even if he is right or you're wrong, he tries to show that you're wrong and that he's right, and to be certain on his opinion. And that's something called hate speech. And that is really wrong, and that happens a lot in Egypt. Thank you.
Hello, this is Antonio. And in Egypt, like Noor said, a couple of months ago, we had the problem with the military and the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think that's a perfect example of the question, what is a hate speech? People who are on the side of the Muslim Brotherhood consider the military coup a hate speech, a form of hate speech, and people who are on the military side consider what the military did, who are on the military side consider the military did okay, and the Muslim Brotherhood responds to that a hate speech. And that is the biggest conflict here in Egypt right now. What was right and what was the freedom of speech and what was the hate speech? Thank you.
This is Noor again, and we had another example of hate speech based on the example we previously mentioned here at our school. Actually, we were assigned projects to do that had to do with the events going on in Egypt now, and there was a student who made a poster titled "Arts as a means of expression." And on that poster, she had a bunch of different pictures of symbols for each side of the conflict and what they meant. One of those pictures was a sign, Muslim Brotherhood sign, which is kind of like 4 fingers up like that. That was their symbol for their protests in Rabaa. And she had that symbol, the picture of that symbol, and she explained what it meant to them. Here in our school, one of the principals, one of the authority figures, saw the poster and didn't like it. He felt that that kind of political discussion shouldn't be brought into the classroom. And problems happened with the teacher, and the teacher, she felt that her freedom of speech or freedom of expression was being taken away from her because they made a problem and they took down the poster. So she decided to leave. And when asked about it, like, the authority figure could say that, well, it was my freedom of expression to say that I didn't like it. But I think he crossed the line into hate speech when he was personally insulting her and offending her to the point where she felt she wasn't even comfortable in the environment she was working in anymore, and she was forced to leave. Thank you.
Thank you so much, students in Egypt. There were some wonderful examples there from your own experience and really highlighted that difficult balance. I'd like to invite Professor Linden to respond before we move on to Liceo Scientifico Fermi.
Yes, again, my thanks for those comments, which are very, very interesting indeed, and I hope our friends in Ukraine, who are also at the moment in a time of political upheaval, might be able to share their reflections on what you've said, because I mean they are they are going through similar upheavals and where hate speech, I'm sure, is beginning to break out. I think Noor's points that she made reveals a very important thing, that in the world of politics, in times of great transformation and change and upheaval, it's almost impossible for the events in the public domain not to reach into different aspects of life. Now, schools are obviously, in some ways, a very special context, a context you know very well because you've been there for quite a while, and they become very difficult when those issues, as it were, begin to enter into a different context. So I want to sort of underline again the way in which the situation in which you're in, the context in which you're in, is a very important factor in thinking about what can be said, what can't be said, and the struggle to get the right balance there. And you've experienced, I mean, Noor's explained the situation in which in your school in Egypt, you've experienced that difficulty in getting the right balance in that particular context. Mai's point was very interesting because she was really talking about freedom of speech as blurting something out, getting it off your mind. And one of the arguments, and it's quite clever of you to have spotted this, one of the arguments for free speech is that it does people good to get it off their chest, as we say, to express themselves. Because if they bottle it up, it's going to get far worse. It's going to sort of ferment inside them and grow and create anger. And it's very good for people to be able to speak out. That was one of the arguments for the First Amendment in the United States. The First Amendment in the United States is a very, very powerful assertion of the right to freedom of speech. And in the American courts, the balance for somebody from Europe, and I think for most of you actually, would be seen to be very much in favor of freedom of speech and very much against curtailing people's right. And one of the arguments was that people do need to be able to speak out for their own psychological well-being. And of course, minorities in different countries very often are too frightened to speak out and say what they think and what they feel. So freedom of speech for minorities is very important indeed. And I think it can have a psychological effect if it's bottled up. Respect and responsibility, Anna's point, I think is absolutely correct. I should have mentioned that because again, that's a theme that comes through that, and this is true not just for freedom of speech, but for all human rights, that if you have a right, you have a corresponding responsibility, and that in a sense is the same sort of balancing act as we're doing when we're talking about prohibiting hate speech and enhancing and supporting freedom of speech. It's another way of expressing that balance.
Thank you, Ian. Liceo Scientifico Fermi, I'd like to invite you to make your comments and thoughts known. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Lucia, and we've read the article by Professor Linden in our classes, and my question, I think that hate speech is really a common problem in our school. But I think that if I start talking about hate speech, about a problem in my class, and if I start saying my opinion, even if my opinion is a negative one, I think that if I can compare my opinion with the opinions of the others, then probably my ideas can change, and in this way we can also prevent and fight against hate speech. If I can start in my class, in my family, then probably my ideas will change. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marianna, and I would like to speak about an experience of mine that reflects hate speech, I think. Well, I think that nowadays, if we think of our world of students, we cannot say hate speech in the way that we have talked about, like the Rwanda case. But I think that hate speech moves to the web, so that not mass media, social network give a really great contribution to hate speech. And the experience of mine is that someone not create violence, but tries to do it. And well, I feel a little bit angry, but I think, as Lucia said, that school can be really the contest when we change opinion, not just prohibiting hate speech, but also talking about, because I think that prohibition cannot be the solution, because it generates more and more hate. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Michele, and I think that we can't that hate speech is a really big problem because we don't know the limit of it. So we can't easily find a balance between the freedom from speech and freedom of expression. Because in my opinion, every people has a different limit of speech. So because of our different personality, of our different situation, of our different context, we feel hate speech in different ways. So if I am a stronger person, maybe I can have a higher limit than another person who is more sensitive, for example. So I have some experiences of my friends, a friend of mine, that have this kind of situation that in a discussion about some political problems felt quite nervous or attacked by the other's opinion. So I think that this balance depends on every people, and that as in the work by Professor Linden is written, that only interfaith education or just the education to listen other people's opinion and to compare could be the way to find something like a balance that can let other people live quite better the different opinions of other people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, students in Italy. I'm going to invite Professor Linden again to have some comments on what you've said. Thank you.
I'd just like to pick up on Michele's point because it's really a very important one. His emphasis on cultural differences and personality differences. It's quite fundamental, that I think, because certain cultures have got a much higher degree of openness and willingness for critical discussion to take place, and others, very often called very traditional, have much less. This is absolutely true. And also personalities vary. My colleague Ruth phoning Nigeria yesterday, and she got somebody on the end of the line on the telephone who said to her, "Open your mouth, you sound like a white woman." And Ruth laughed and said, "But I am a white woman." I would have been quite upset if somebody had said that to me, "You sound like a white woman." Ruth wasn't at all upset. She just laughed. People have got different capacities not to be offended, as it were. And of course, you can be taught to be offended. And also you can be provoked deliberately. If you think of the Danish cartoons, do you remember the Danish cartoons, which were very offensive about the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him? Do you remember those? The tremendous damage that did around the world, and with a number of deaths being incurred. That set of cartoons, as far as we know, was produced by the editor precisely to test what the Muslim reaction would be to it and to see what the Muslim opinion was about freedom of speech. Well, of course, everybody found out what the opinion was in certain parts of the world about that in the riots and in the deaths that took place. That was a deliberate provocation in that case. In another case, I might say something to you in the course of this which you find offensive, and I hadn't realized at all that what I was saying was offensive. That's a very different sort of situation. And again, 6 of you in the room might be offended, and the other 6 might not even have noticed it because of your personality and sensitivity. So, Michele, thank you for bringing that up, because it's pretty critical, I think. The other thing was, I think it was Lucia at the beginning, and also Miana, the second speaker, pointed to something very, very important indeed. And that's what the great philosopher harbour mass called conversation and it relates really to the whole concept of dialogue that you have and motivates the way you relate to each other in these conversations, these video conferences. And this concept of conversation is that you don't argue ad hominem, you don't attack people, you try to have a conversation in which you listen and one opinion is expressed and another opinion, and people grow in understanding because the opinion is honestly expressed, but it's expressed in such a way that there's no violence in it, there's no rejection in it, there's no offense in it. And this is how societies that are harmonious work, and how classes and schools that are harmonious work, that people feel free to express themselves. And we heard the class in Egypt expressing themselves very clearly on something. They feel free to make these statements and express it, and they're able to do it in a way which isn't offensive. And this is the ideal conversation. And obviously we need conversations between political leaders, and those 60 leaders in Johannesburg for Madiba's funeral, they were having little conversations, whereas normally they have very formal negotiations. And it's events like that where people have conversations as human beings listening to each other and not being threatened or not negotiating, as it were, that are so important for international relations.
Thank you, Professor Linden. I'd like to invite the students in Israel now to give their opinion and their thoughts. Thank you.
Hi, it's in bar. I think the line is tricky. You can say anything on your mind as it doesn't hurt anyone else, life or
emotions.
Yeah. If it does, so the line is crossed. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michal, and in Hebrew we have an expression that said, "What you hate, don't do to your friends," and I think that's exactly the. Someone said that to you, if you'll be hurt, and if you did. In my experience, in my primary school, Israel is a very newborn country. Full of different cultures.
We're struggling to hear you in Israel. The audio is clipping. I wonder if you could repeat your comment again. I'm sorry. Would you be able to repeat what you just said? Thank you. We can't see or hear you at the moment, so I'm going to get Nonica to Skype with you off the screen to see if she can help. In the meantime, whilst we get you audio and visual back, we're just going to go over to Ukraine. So Israel, will come back to you in a moment, and hopefully your bandwidth will have gone back up again. So we'll start with Ukraine and then we'll come back to you, okay? Thank you. Do go ahead.
Hello, my name is Vika, and I want to say that hatred as well as hate speech is something that shouldn't be in our life. All people, irrespectively of their nations, religion, status, ages, would be much happier if hate speech and violence disappear from our relationship. Because one hate speech can cause another, and our hate speech can return to us. Personally, I try to avoid hate speech, but sometimes I do it. I remember a strong feeling of hatred when my schoolmates bullied a younger boy who looked different them. I really hated them because I didn't understand why they did it. But I understood that my hate speech would do only worse. So I came up to each of them and explained that he is just weaker and we shouldn't insult weaker people. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Lera, and I want to say that hate speech has bad consequences. I think that it spoils our society, and moreover I want to say that hate speech can cause a violence. Personally, I don't support hate speech, but sometimes, for example, in my family, when we are quarreling, I can say to somebody, for example, to my sister, I hate you. Of course, I will regret about it because it really spoils our relationship. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Natasha, and one point that comes to hate speech, I think that in our present Ukraine we have a great gap between rich and poor people, and I think that is the problem. Rich people waste much money of buying expensive houses, cars, pieces of art, but others can hardly make ends meet. Besides, I think that sometimes politicians should be more tolerant to other people. They can make hate speech before the audience, and I think I don't like when people with higher position abuse people with lower state. But that is a problem in our society. Thank you.
Would anyone else in Ukraine like to add anything?
Hi, my name is Lera, and I would like to tell you about our religion and about our society. We belong to Orthodox Christianity. Our religion teaches us to be compassionate and tolerant. Of course, any rudeness is unacceptable, but sometimes I know the cases when our priests don't like the single-sex marriages, and for me it is not normal because I respect my religion, and at the same time I support people's choice and their freedom. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, my name is Dasha, and I would like to add that everybody has a choice what to think and what to do. And that means that we have a freedom of our speech. In my town there are not a great variety of different nationalities, for example Afro-Americans. But in my class there is an Umani, and he is a very positive person, and my classmates and I have good relations with him. And that's why I strongly believe that we shouldn't judge people for their nationalities, and we should live in peaceful society. Thank you.
Now we live in a hectic time, and some people are really nervous about their problems. This is not very good for us, and I think that we should speak about of this with our classmate and schoolmate. We should start from us and don't be so rude, and the world become better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, students in Ukraine. Professor Linden, would you like to respond?
I'm thinking that students in Ukraine are not quite so political as students in Egypt when they think about their society, but I'm only teasing you, don't worry. What I'd like to focus in on, I didn't catch your names all that well, so apologies for that, but one of my fellow bearers of the Y chromosome, in other words, a young man on the left, I thought his point about the rich and the poor was really good and quite important, because there's quite a lot of possibility for not respecting the human dignity of poor people and of degrading them in the way you speak about them. And only this morning I was walking to the Tony Blair Faith Foundation office. We're right in the middle of London, and there was a very, very poor Roma family, what we used to call gypsies, Roma family, with very, very sad, pathetic baggage with them, you know, looking very, very poor. And they had a little trolley and they were wheeling it across one of these huge main roads with huge amounts of traffic on. And they clearly were immigrants. They had no idea about not crossing at that point, that you should go across a special place where you're allowed to cross the road. And there was a British man right next to me, and he turned to me as he saw them and said, "Animals, animals." And I said to him, "No, they're human beings just like you and me, except they're just very, very poor." And then he didn't, funnily enough, get angry with me. And we walked along a little bit, and we didn't have a Habermas conversation, but he added to the hate speech about them by talking about all the things that they do, and would you like to have them living outside your door? And I said, well, I don't have them living, neither do you. And the reason they look like that is because they're very, and so on. We had to, so your point, I think, about hate speech towards the poor is very true. And equally, immigrants, because the world now is globalized and people are moving around a tremendous amount looking for work or asylum seekers from war zones. So all of our countries have people coming in across our borders who are foreign to us. And this immigrant population does not really have freedom of speech. I mean, they never appear speaking on the radio or the television. There might be a social worker that speaks for them. They never are people who you hear talking themselves about what they feel. You hear an awful lot about what the host country's citizens feel about them, but you don't hear what they feel about. You don't hear what they've gone through in their lives, and so on. So minorities, particularly immigrants, de facto, I mean, in law they've got freedom of speech, but in practice they don't. And that's an aspect of poverty. So a big thank you for bringing that particular point up. Single-sex marriage and that particular issue. Again, thank you for that, because I left that out. There is a group of people who are massively discriminated against, who suffer extraordinary violence, both verbal and physical, and who are marginalized in societies. And, you know, thanks be to God, in many societies, that's changed a lot in the last 20 years. But in other societies, it hasn't. I mean, it's, you know, you're treated as a criminal in some African countries if you are gay or bisexual or transgender. You're treated an absolute freak and as a very moral person. I mean, the level of violence against gay people in Europe is quite extraordinary. The percentage of gay people in Europe who've experienced either verbal abuse or physical abuse in the last 12 months is about 80%. It's absolutely extraordinary level. And I'm more than grateful that you raised that, because I'd forgotten to raise it. Let's stop there and see if we can get Israel back.
Israel, it'd be wonderful to hear from you now. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Michal, and Israel is kind of a newborn country, only 5, something like that, and because of that, Israel is an immigrants country. We have a lot of languages, and in my primary school was my ethnicity was very different from most of the other kids, and they kind of make laugh at me because of that, and I don't think they really meant it to hurt me or something, but it actually did. And in Hebrew, we have an expression that said that what you'll hate, don't do to your friends. And I think that's exactly the balance that is supposed to. And
We've just lost your sound because you've had a bandwidth problem, but Nonika, our technician, is going to turn off your video to see if it will be easier for us just to hear you. So once she's done that, would you try repeat? Well, you don't need to repeat what you've just said. We did hear most of it. But if you just continue speaking, hopefully we'll be able to hear you in a moment.
I'll tell them a little story.
Can you hear us right now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Can you?
We can. But talk a little bit longer and we'll see if you fade.
Hello, my name is Mia, and I'd like to comment on what the dilemma we're facing is what you hate don't do to your friends, and that's a very I think a blurred line, because as you said, we are a country full of different cultures and different languages and different people. We're all very diverse, and that's exactly the problem. You can't tell what the other thinks and what he likes. You can't what? You can't force them. You can't you can't base your boundaries on that saying. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shoval, and I have a Facebook page, and I wrote something. It's in English, and I wrote something about the fact I'm from Israel. Somebody wrote in the comments that Israel is the worst place on earth. I decided to not start a fight or something, so I just wrote him, it's not. Here it's a place to talk about Jennifer Lawrence, and not about Israel. If you want to talk about Israel, come to the page messages, and then he stopped. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Imbal. So earlier you talked about gays, and I want to share from my experience. My mother, she's a lesbian, and when I was young, I didn't really know what it means. I was like 9 years old. So also my friends in my class didn't really know what it means. So they knew my mother is a lesbian, and they use the word lesbian as a curse. So they told me a lesbian, and I really offended. I really took it to my heart, and I really hurt. So I thought they use the word lesbian as a curse, and I didn't really know what is a lesbian. So I thought, and I know my mother is a lesbian, so is it wrong to be a lesbian? Because I didn't really know what it means. And I really hurt because of it. So thank you.
Is there nobody more from Israel? There's many of you. I thought you might be one or two more wanted to speak. In all your diversity.
Okay. Hello, my name is Mariana, and I'm a Christian. I wasn't born here, but I live in Israel. In many other societies, like groups in Israel, I've been receiving hate, even they didn't mean it. Like they said something like, "You're not Jewish, so what?" So it's not so nice. I don't know if they meant it, but it hurted me. So it's kind of, I'm not sure if they know it hurt, but people need to know like the border, when it's good or when it's bad. Thank you.
Let me start with the. Oh, somebody's coming out. That's great.
Hello, my name is Adva, and I think that the limit between good expression between bad expression, it's until you hit someone feeling or you make him feel bad with himself. Thank you.
Okay, that's it from Israel.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to tell you, before I answer and respond to the Israel points, the points from all of you, I'd like to, because I know some of you are having to go at in about 5 minutes, I just wanted to tell you a quick story. One of my friends was very, very senior in the South African churches. And this was during and I'm telling you it because, you know, I'm sure you've all seen some of the footage of the Mandela funeral. He was a very close friend of mine, and so he could talk to me personally in a way he probably wouldn't have said in public. And one day, during the struggle for freedom in South Africa, he was in Soweto, and a number of black South African young people were murdered by the security police, just shot down in the street. And that night he was in central Johannesburg and had to go to a meeting, and he was walking along past a white school, white South African school, and he looked into the playground, and the children were, you know, all there, the students were all there. And to his horror, he felt rising up inside himself a sense of hatred and really dark thoughts in his mind. And he told me, he said, I realized that apartheid really meant apartheid. It was not just unjust, but it also led to feelings of hatred and a desire for violence in people. And I think that's a very important thing to remember, that injustice and a wrong way of living in society creates in people hatred and a sense of wanting to commit acts of violence. And I don't know whether you saw it, but we tweeted something that Nelson Mandela said when he was alive, a lovely statement, and it's this. I'll read it to you. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion, or we could add his nationality. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. I think that last bit is certainly true of Mandela himself, but I don't know how true it is of everybody. But I think he's right. I think he's put his finger on something, that it's the situation, it's what's happened to you, it's the way you're treated, it's the way you're made to feel humiliated and neglected and marginalized that can give rise to feelings of hate. And also fear. There's so many causes of hate speech. So let me quickly get back to the points you were making. Diversity, Mikhail's point, diversity is sometimes quite frightening. It's quite, you don't quite know where you are or how to deal with people. And I've lived in many different countries around the world. And when you feel a stranger, you're very vulnerable. And you can even feel vulnerable in your own country if you don't really think you understand the people you're living with. And that horrible remark by that guy this morning was based on that sort of fear. He was not a very educated man. He was probably not very rich himself. And he was fearful of the other, of other people. And that diversity can create. So I think that's a really important point. Also, the point that was made about once you experience the reality, you get a very different picture of what people are like. People build up stereotypes of what the people they're frightened of are really like. And they're absolutely amazed when they discover that they're just like they are. They've got the same love of their kids and their grandchildren. They've got the same love of their home, of their villages. They've got the same love of friends and the same hopes and aspirations that, things will go well in the future. And the bonds, the common humanity that everybody has is so enormous, but can so quickly get overridden by false perceptions. And a tiny violent minority can be seen to represent the reality of a whole people, of a whole community. And of course, that's the most terrible nonsense. It's a huge lie, in fact. Difficult to be a Christian in some places. Yes, it is. It is. It's sometimes difficult to be a Muslim in some places as well. If you're a Shia Muslim in a Sunni area or a Sunni Muslim in a Shia area, right across the world, what I've said about stereotypes and perceptions are absolutely basic to the way people see each other. I think it's coming up to about time for one of the schools to go. So I'll stop there to give you a chance to disappear and say goodbye, as it were.
Yes, I understand that students in Israel and Ukraine have to leave at this point. Is that correct? If it is, give me a wave.
It's true for Israel then.
But it's not true for Ukraine.
But that's lovely.
Okay, well, Israel, it's been wonderful hearing from you. And I'm very sorry that you haven't had longer to speak. But I will create a forum on the online community where you can go and connect with the other schools that are here and maybe ask some of the questions that I'm sure have come into your minds as a result of what all the other students have said.
Before you go, somebody tell me what Tichon Hadash Belia means. What do the words mean in English?
The new municipal high school in Herzliya, Israel.
Thank you. I thought it was going to be something much more dramatic than
so do say very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Okay, well, students in Italy, Ukraine and Egypt, I'd now like to open up the video conference for a time for you to ask your questions or make comments about what you've heard from each other. There have been so many points raised, issues, things to talk about, so I hope you've all got some comments or some questions for each other about what you've heard. So I'm going to go back to Egypt, because it's been a long time since you've spoken. Then go to Italy and then to you in Ukraine, and I hope we can have a bit more of a time for free dialogue. So in Egypt, do go ahead if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nada, and what I wanted to elaborate on was how the increasing hate speech in Egypt maybe it could outweigh the freedom of speech that causes good to people. And my question was whether when people justify hate speech as a form of freedom of expression, whether then the government or the authority has the right to take away the right to have freedom of speech, if it's causing more harm to people rather than good. Thank you.
That is a great question, and before you ask your next one, I'd like to see if we can get some responses to that, because it's a big question. So I'd like to see if students in Italy would like to respond. Thank you.
Excuse me, my name is Stefania. Can you repeat the question, please? Because we didn't heard it clearly. Thank you.
Yeah, the question was that when you have creeping hate speech, in other words, when the hate speech is getting worse, as it were, and causing real damage, does this justify the government stopping or abrogating the right to freedom of speech in any way?
Okay, thank you. My name is Stefania, and what I think of this question is the fact that when we are just talking to ourselves or talking in our home about, for example, what we eat or something or somebody we ate, it is a kind of just a little speech that hasn't any sense and any meaning of it. But when we are talking about hate or talking about something or somebody we hate with our friends or using medias, it becomes even worse, because we are kind of getting viral with the word of hate or what we are hating. So I think that even talking about the balance that you have talked before, the balance between hate speeches and freedom of speech is the fact that when you are just speaking but you don't act, hate has no meaning. But if you after you're speaking, then you even act, it becomes hate and can hurt and be a damage for other people. Thank you. Well, I think that in Italy we had a really important example of an action that can rise up when there is kind of hate speech. And if you think of fascism, in Italy it is not allowed to create another fascist party, and I think that this is not a bad action because of what fascism did in Italy really destroyed our liberty and our country. So I think that it depends on cases that we are in front of. Thank you. And,
Well, the question we are asked to answer. My name is Francesco, and thank you for letting me talk. The question you want me to answer is a very difficult question, because when you have a very creepy hate speech, you feel like someone has to do something. But the government, in order to act against hate speech, has to make laws, and making a law against hate speech is really difficult. I don't want to say impossible, but you can say but making laws against hate speech is a very difficult and not easy operation. So I think that what the government can really do is preventing hate speech. For example, with education, the government has to finance projects such as face-to-face and similar projects to teach young people and new generation that hate speech is a bad thing and to teach how to avoid and fight against hate speech. Anyway, when the hate speech becomes really bad, for example, the government has to do something. For example, if you have an hate speech against Jewish people after the big Holocaust has happened, this hate speech has to be stopped by the government. But in general, in the less important cases, the government cannot do anything, can't do something really effective. So the best thing to do is educate people not to do and not to do hate speech, not to. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Roberta, and I want to denounce. Okay, hi. I want to denounce a way of thinking which is spreading in Italy, and in my opinion, that is very dangerous. I found many differences in advertising here in Italy and in other European countries, but the one that which most scared me is that here in Italy, to sell a product, we use women or parts of their bodies, and in this way, women and objects are put on the same level, and this is a very dangerous idea because it's pushed the men to use women as objects and to consider them in this way. So my question is, should the government forbid this kind of advertisement because advertising is becoming a kind of form of hate speech? Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta, and everyone else in Italy. Some great points there about when the government should step in against hate speech. The students in Ukraine can only stay for 10 more minutes, so I'm going to go to them now. Then I'm going to go back to Egypt for your feedback and then to Ian on this question. So do go ahead, Ukraine. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexander. So I'm completely sure that the government should forbidden advertising and propaganda of violence and bad words maybe on television, on the internet, because I think violence is that thing that will put our society into the abyss of self-destruction. That is one of the worthless things in our world. All people, all children should grow up by their parents with sense of responsibility and respect to each other. And I think violence have no place in our present world. Thank you. So thank you very much. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you, students in Ukraine.
Bye.
Bye. All right, and then there were two. So students in Egypt, I understand that both of you can now stay for the next 20 minutes, which is wonderful. I'd like to get your thoughts on what you've heard from the other students and any comments or questions on that. Thank you.
Hi, this is Anna, and I'd like to comment on what I think was Francesco said about the government playing a role in forbidding or not forbidding freedom of speech or hate speech. I think he made a very, very important point because it's in our days we're living in such a modern area. It's really hard to keep check of what is being said. Nowadays we have Twitter, we have Facebook. There is no way to control of what people are saying or coming out of their mouths. So the best way to end hate speech would be educating people, teaching them to tolerate other people in spite of their religion, where they come from, or the color of skin they have. Thank you.
Hi, my name is May, and I would like to answer the question asked by the student from Italy. And I would like to say that I think that it's right for the government to stop advertisement that use women's body for this, because people should have some ethics or some morals that should be taught in homes and the family, that when they see their fathers respecting their mother, they should do so to everyone else. Because if someone does something bad, if the boy look at a girl in a bad way, then he gives the right to other person to look at his sister or his mother or his wife either in that way. Thank you.
I would like, this is Noor again. Anna, what Anna said, I agree with her very much, and I think it's very difficult in our day and age to censor what people are saying without stepping over the line too far and being in infringement of their freedom of speech. And I think the problem comes more when governments are the ones who are encouraging hate speech and who are presenting hate speech. Like in Egypt right now, a lot of the hate speech is coming from the government itself, trying to cause a rift between the people and the Muslim Brotherhood for whether political or personal reasons for somebody who has control over the media. And to answer the question from the student from Italy, I somewhat disagree with May. I somewhat disagree because I think people should be free to put what they want in their own advertisements, and that if you start somewhere where you try to put boundaries on that, it's like the first step in to completely taking away the freedom of expression, in my opinion. And I think that my morals or my beliefs or my opinion on a certain thing doesn't mean that it should be applied to everyone else. And I think that whether you objectify a woman or not starts more in the home area, how you were raised. It has nothing to do with what kind of advertisements you see, because if you're taught not to objectify women, it doesn't matter what you see. You still won't objectify them. Thank you.
Hello, this is Antonio. I want to answer Nada's question about the freedom of speech. Although it is one of the human rights, freedom of speech is a gift today. Not everybody in every country gets that, okay? And you have to use it wisely. Like Anna said before, to get to that point, you have to have responsibility and wisdom to know on whether or not your speech is a hate speech. And like Nu said, when the government takes away some of that right, it is hate speech. Okay, when it is a type of hate speech. Like one of the students in Ukraine said, one hate speech brings another. When the government does that, takes away the right of hate speech, he is influencing, I don't know the exact word, encouraging hate speech. And that, yeah, that's basically it. That's what I believe. That once the government takes away that right, it's encouraging hate speech. And the freedom of speech is the right of everybody. And they should use it wisely. Thank you.
Hi, this is Nuran, and I agree with what Noor is saying about the freedom of rights and freedom of speech. Sorry, and I think even if we set very strict laws, it could be hard to apply because everyone has their own morals and values. And for example, what you see is wrong, I could see it completely fine. So I think this law can always be broken by some people because everyone has their own standards. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nada again, and I have a question. As everyone has been saying about freedom of speech, and how if the hate speech outweighs the goodness that is supposed to come from freedom of expression, and that the government should act a role in prohibiting so much hate speech. But what my question is that as if there wouldn't be as much if when freedom of speech when freedom of speech can be prohibited, and that when freedom of speech can turn into something negative like hate speech, does that imply that democracy cannot be fully democratic? Whether there is a country that is fully democratic as there is hate speech with the freedom of expression, that should be something positive and helps people. Thank you.
I'm going to go to the students in Italy to respond to all those comments that you've made and that final question. So students in Italy, what would you like to respond? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adriana. I think sometimes government cannot give us a very good example. For example, we are talking about freedom of speech, but when I say something, I can say something that can hurt other people's feelings. Even our ministers sometimes said things not very kind about other people or other minorities. For example, in some cases they were also racist in a certain way. Some of them said things about discrimination, and they were not very very kind or polite. I think this is something that has to start from ourselves. We cannot expect to follow the examples of other people. We have to start from ourselves to improve this situation. I think even with our closest friends, sometimes we don't even realize, but we can be unpolite and rude. For example, there is an experience of mine. One of my closest friends confessed to be gay, and he was very sad because he didn't feel appreciated and accepted from other friends and from other guys in general, because he felt to be wrong, and he felt to be like a bad guy, a wrong person. I think it tends to make other people feel discriminated and like a kind of monster in society. For example, we studied Frankenstein in school, and we can say the character of Frankenstein is the bad character, is the enemy, and we tend to make other people to feel like enemies in society, to we compare them to bad characters from our novels, for example. Thank you.
Hello, it's Stefania again, and what I would like to say is something that concerns the same topic that one of my friends, Roberta, has taken, and it is advertisements and women in advertisements. What we are talking about is the fact that women in advertisement are treated like objects, but this is just one side of the coin, because on the other side of the coin we have women that are criticized for not being flawless. And this is a really important topic, because nowadays in our society, women are treated like idealized beauty, and women should always be flawless and perfect. If you are not like that, you are exiled, banned, and hated. So hatred is a kind of topic that concerns any kind of topic you can think of, and even the fact that if you are not without an imperfection, but you have some things that are different from the standardized kind of beauty, you are exiled and banned from the other kind of people of society, and you are not any longer part of the society. So it is a topic that is a really present day, and that really touched me, because since I was 15 years old, people always told me that in order to be accepted, in order to be part of a group, I had to be thinner, I had to be more beautiful, and I didn't want to look like the model, the idealized model on the cover of the magazines, because I want to be myself. So if in order to be accepted I should be unhappy, false, altered, I wouldn't be like that, and I prefer to be hated than to be another person that is not me. Thank you.
Thank you all of you in Italy as well for those very personal reflections. I'm now going to pass over to Professor Linden to kind of respond to you and wrap up this video conference. Thank you.
Gosh, that was really very rich, really amazing. I hardly know where to begin, because there's so many very important points being made. So let me have a go and start off where we sort of started off with, say, with Francesco. Francesco, yes, you're absolutely spot on, frankly. The big problem with hate speech laws is basically that they don't work unless you're in a draconian, very authoritarian state, which means that most of your other human rights are going by the board, so you don't particularly want to be there anyway. In the United Kingdom, we had the Racial and Religious Hatred Act passed in 2006, but it's very, very difficult indeed to convict people under it for a whole variety of reasons I haven't got time really to go into. And the other point that was made, that in a world of Twitter and Facebook, it's almost impossible to control, as the intelligence agencies saw with whistleblowers. It's impossible to control the flow of information and what is said. And if I'm a blogger, I blog for a newspaper. When I just don't read some of the reactions because they're so horrible. You know, some of the stuff that's said is really very violent and unpleasant indeed. And it's almost very little you can do about that. But I think that's a whole terrain now that we need to think about. And I think some of the big companies like Google and so on are beginning to consider their responsibilities in limiting what goes on. And in a sense, that brings me to Roberta's very important point about selling products with women's bodies, and Adriana's very important comment on the culture of youth and beauty. I can tell you, when you reach my age and you're going bald, you certainly, as you get older, you tend to get less beautiful, which is a bit disturbing. And so I kind of share that anxiety about a culture in which the only valuable thing is to look amazingly beautiful. The only sort of consoling thing I can say is that in my experience, and I've got daughters and 14 grandchildren. My experience, if you're too beautiful as a woman, the boys are frightened of you. And if you're too beautiful as a man, the girls are frightened of you. So I suppose that's a slightly consoling thought. But the point that you make is very, very substantive, I think, that we are in a very strange culture in that sense, in which the most superficial things are given the most weight, as it were. And Roberta's point, didn't mention it, but of course takes us right into the realm of pornography and the availability of pornography, and whether or not pornography is an issue about freedom of speech. In the United States, it tends to be treated like that the pornographic movie or pornographic stills or whatever it is seen to be a legitimate expression, as it were, which has to be protected. It doesn't necessarily mean that protection has to be sort of active, but it's something that can't be prohibited, as it were, sometimes in some branch of very, very sort of absolutist freedom of expression thinking. And that sort of takes Roberta's point on to sort of another different level. Obviously, pornography as the degradation of women and child pornography as something that is a crime is another level of that, which takes you right outside freedom of expression into sort of criminal law. Democracy and freedom of speech. Democracy does demand a significant level of freedom of speech. There's really no doubt about that. Amartya Sen, the great Indian developmentalist, points out that some of the great famines and disasters are more likely to cost a huge cost in human life in countries where there's no freedom of speech, because the government won't own up to what's going on. I mean, think of the starvation and death in China during the Cultural Revolution. Think of North Korea at the moment, and you'll see how important freedom of speech is to democracy, even at the basic level of saving human lives. Because if the government won't admit and allow publication of the level of malnutrition and starvation, think of the Mugabe government in Zimbabwe, then of course nothing can be done about it very easily, and then the deaths get worse. It's a sort of absolutely key issue. Stefania, coming on to media, yeah, I think that's another whole terrain where this has got to be fought out, the issue of freedom of expression and of the limits to it. No doubt about it, in many places the media can whip up violence, even if it's not intending to, by concentrating on nothing but violence and never telling the positive stories about the interfaith work that's going on, or the peace movement, or the Israeli-Palestinian, or the rabbis for Palestine, or the Palestinian Muslims for Israel, and so on. Those sorts of stories just don't get told. And so the media has a responsibility in that. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But I'd like to just end, as it were, with going back to Mandela. People learn to hate, but they can be taught to love, which gets right back to the point that Francesco made at the end, where he said that really, if you accept the fact that governments actually can't do a lot about hate speech, they can do something about the worst hate speech. It's left to civil society, it's left to all of you, it's left to teachers and universities and families, the family's been strongly mentioned, to create a culture of encountering people with respect, respecting their dignity, and learning to live and use your tongue in a way that's respectful and loving and seeks understanding. That's the duty of families, of schools, of universities, and everywhere where people, as they grow up, are formed, and where people who are already active in public life have a responsibility to honor that in their public utterances, and to be called to account if they don't. And the point made about fascism is, of course, that fascism invariably finds somebody to hate and somebody to treat as the enemy. And I think the point made there was from Italy. It was really quite important that not just Italy, but many other parts of the world ban certain sorts of political parties. For example, in many parts of Africa, parties that are likely to create division in society can be banned. And that's a very delicate thing, because clearly you're not only running then into the freedom of expression, you're running into the freedom of association, which is another great human right. We have to be able to get together in the classroom, and even we have to be able to get together in cyberspace to talk and discuss. I'll end there with just a big thank you to you. You've helped me a lot to think about the dilemma I set you. You've made some amazing points, and I'm doing another one of these video conferences tomorrow, and I'll be amazed if it's as wonderful and as good as your responses. So a big thank you from me.
And a big thank you from me as well to both Professor Linden for his really valuable contributions to today's video conference, and to all of you and the two schools that have left us, because you have clearly been so well prepared. You've added so much to this, and I really hope that you will have taken away a lot with you today as well. We don't have time for our usual reflections right now. It is 10:30, but like I said to the students in Israel, I will create a space on the online community for you and send that to your teachers so that you can continue this discussion online. And if Professor Linden would like to be part of that, I'll allow him to do that as well. So I hope you can continue these discussions, because I know that for many of you this is a really real and live issue, that balance of freedom of speech and freedom from hate. So thank you today, and I'd like to invite you to open up your microphones and say goodbye to one another.
And could I just say goodbye to you first? Wassalam to Egypt and arrivederci to Italy.
Goodbye. Bye.